The Last Meal. Ethan Carter, an urban legend investigator and a YouTuber known for his deep dives into the unknown, had heard the rumors for months. People were vanishing after dining at a peculiar, off-the-beaten-path restaurant. There were no trace of their disappearances, no clues left behind. Only an eerie silence and empty seats. He couldn't resist the temptation to uncover the truth. After all, there was no better content for his channel than to explore what others couldn't or wouldn't investigate. Late one night, he gathered his two closest friends, Mia and Jason, both seasoned travelers who were no strangers to his more dangerous explorations. Ethan, looking into the camera. Tonight, we step into the darkness of the Vanishing Feast, a place where diners don't return. Stay with us as we uncover the truth about the disappearances. Mia, ever cautious, gave a nervous chuckle. Mia, are we seriously doing this, Ethan? A restaurant where people disappear? I think we should just find a normal spot for dinner. Jason, looking at the flickering neon sign in the distance, wasn't much more convinced. Jason, yeah, this is starting to feel like a bad horror movie, and I'm not interested in being the next guy to vanish. But Ethan, as always, was confident. Ethan, with a grin. Trust me, the best stories come from the most dangerous places. They arrived at the restaurant, which looked unremarkable from the outside, an old brick building tucked in a forgotten corner of the city. A dim, flickering sign hung above the door reading, The Vanishing Feast. It seemed like any other place, except for the unnerving quiet around it. As they walked inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air was thick with an unsettling silence. The lighting was low, casting long shadows that twisted across the room. The walls were adorned with old portraits of people with blank stares, their eyes seeming to follow you as you moved. There were a few patrons scattered around, eating their meals in complete silence. None of them made a sound as they chewed, stared into space, or sipped from their glasses. The waiter, tall, thin, and oddly still, approached them without a word. He had an unnerving calmness about him. His features were stiff, as though he were a mannequin rather than a person. He handed them the menus without a smile, and his eyes locked onto theirs for a split second. His expression was emotionless, like he was waiting for something. The menu was strange. The items were written in an old script, one that neither Mia nor Jason could read. Only one dish was written in English. The Last Meal. Jason, laughing nervously. Seriously? The Last Meal? This can't be real. Mia, shaking her head. Come on, let's just order something normal and get out of here. But Ethan, as always, wanted to push the limits. Ethan, we're here for the mystery, right? Let's try the Last Meal. The waiter nodded, and without a word, he left. Moments later, the food arrived, beautifully presented, with steam rising from the plates like a fog, curling into the air. The smell was unusual. It was almost intoxicating, a blend of something both appealing and off-putting. Mia, hesitantly. This smells strange. But I'm starving. Ethan didn't hesitate. He took a bite. The moment the food hit his tongue, he felt a strange warmth spread through his body, followed by an overwhelming rush of pleasure. The flavors were beyond anything he'd ever experienced, rich, complex, and deep, like the food had been crafted with knowledge passed down through generations. But as he swallowed, something changed. A voice, faint but clear, whispered in his ear. You are part of the feast now. Ethan blinked, his vision blurring for a moment. His hand shook as he looked down at his plate, watching the food twist and curl as though it were alive. Mia, frantically looking at Ethan. Ethan, are you okay? Ethan, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. Something's wrong. His heart raced, and suddenly, the restaurant around him began to warp. The walls seemed to breathe, and the faces of the other diners twisted into grotesque masks. Time felt like it had stopped, or perhaps it was stretching out endlessly. His body felt light, almost weightless, as if the very foundation of reality was shifting. Suddenly, darkness engulfed him. The feast begins. Ethan's eyes snapped open, and he found himself no longer at the table. He was standing in the middle of what looked like an enormous kitchen, dimly lit and filled with enormous, bubbling cauldrons. The air was thick with the smell of something unidentifiable, both repulsive and strangely enticing. The walls were pulsating, as though they were breathing, and the ground was slick, almost liquid-like. Mia shaking Ethan. Ethan, what's happening? Where are we? Jason, wide-eyed and sweating, looked around frantically. Jason, this doesn't make sense. Where's the restaurant? What is this place? Ethan, still disoriented, tried to speak, but his voice came out as a low rasp. He looked down at his hands, horrified to see his fingers fading. His body, his very being, was being erased, becoming part of something else. Ethan. It's not real. It's all a trap. We're not supposed to be here. They're using us. Mia gripping his arm. Who? What do you mean? Before he could answer, there was a sudden movement from the shadows. A monstrous figure, tall and grotesque, with a face that had no features, emerged. It was a chef, but it wasn't human. Its body was disfigured, its skin stretched tight, and its hands were enormous, wielding a cleaver larger than any knife Ethan had ever seen. Mia screaming. Run! But they didn't have time. The ground beneath them cracked open, and they were sucked into another room, darker, more suffocating than before. The Kitchen of Souls. Ethan, Mia, and Jason found themselves in a vast, underground kitchen. The sight was horrific, giant cauldrons full of flesh, some still twitching. The air was thick with a suffocating odor, a mixture of rot and decay. But what chilled them to the core was what they saw next. There were people trapped in glass jars. Their bodies were fading, becoming translucent, as if they were being slowly consumed by the air itself. They tried to scream, but their mouths were sealed, their voices muffled by the glass that imprisoned them. Jason, pulling Ethan away. Ethan, this is insane. We need to get out. But it was too late. They were already part of the feast. Their bodies, their souls, everything was being consumed by the very walls, the very air. Ethan's vision started to distort as he struggled to keep his mind intact. He grabbed Mia and Jason, pulling them toward a possible exit, but the walls seemed to stretch, pulling them deeper into the maze. Suddenly, the chef appeared again, his cleaver raised high. His eyes, empty sockets, stared into their souls. Without a word, he raised the blade, and the room exploded into chaos. The escape. Or not. The trio ran, the walls closing in on them, the hallway elongating as though they were trapped in a nightmare. They twisted and turned, trying to find a way out, but the place kept shifting, rooms merging into one, corridors twisting into endless loops. They finally burst through a door, and for a moment, everything stopped. They were back in the restaurant. But it felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. The patrons sat at their tables, their eyes now vacant, lifeless. Mia panting. Are we back? Jason gripping his head. This doesn't make sense. We were just in that other place. Ethan turned, horrified. They were still part of the feast. The waiter stood at the front of the room, his expression unchanged, his gaze unwavering. Waiter, in a voice too calm for comfort. You never left. You belong to the feast now. And before they could react, the lights flickered. The world around them vanished, leaving only the dark, empty chairs waiting for the next unsuspecting guest. The vanishing feast. Days passed, and the world continued as it always had. New patrons arrived at the restaurant, oblivious to the horrors hidden within its walls. They sat down, unaware that they were ordering their last meal. The cycle continued. And deep within the haunted kitchen, Ethan, Mia, and Jason's fading forms screamed in silence, trapped forever in the eternal feast. And so the restaurant waits,